Welcome to Bear in Mind. I'm your host, Chancellor Bob Berdhal. We're coming to you from our television studio at the University of California, Berkeley, where we're joined by a small audience of students, faculty, and staff. Bear in Mind, which also appears on the UC Berkeley website, is a monthly conversation with some of the most interesting and informed people here at the Berkeley campus. On this edition, we'll be talking to Alexandra Roedder, a senior majoring in music, Joanne Ikeda, a UC Berkeley specialist in nutrition and obesity issues, and public policy professor David Kirp about the economics of higher education. So stay tuned for this edition of Bear in Mind. Our first guest, Alexandra Roedder, is a senior majoring in music here at Berkeley. She's also a gifted cellist who performs with the UC Symphony and with many other chamber groups here on campus. Alexandra, welcome to Bear in Mind.
It's good to be here.
Well, now tell me, how long have you been playing cello?
I've been playing since I was 7. I actually wanted to start when I was 3. There's a family story about me listening to my parents playing with some friends of theirs. And
Are they musicians?
Yes, they are.
Okay.
My mom plays violin, my dad plays piano, although he hasn't practiced much in the last 20 years. But they had some friends over for chamber music, and I remember standing outside the living room and listening to the cello and saying, I'm going to play that instrument. But I started when I was 7, and I haven't stopped.
What caused you to choose Berkeley?
The campus is beautiful. It was one of the 2 schools I got admitted to. They offered me a Regents scholarship, and I loved the campus. I loved the people. I loved the feeling of being alone in a crowd and feeling like I could make of myself what I wanted to.
Now, here at Berkeley, we have a very fine program in musicology, and I understand that you're studying musicology in that program as well. What are you focusing on?
My main focus is on the cello of the 19th century. A lot of people are studying cello in the 18th and 17th centuries. That's what's commonly called early music, and there are lots of recordings out there, lots of books, lots of new editions, and lots of manuscripts as well. With the 19th century, I think it's more interesting because that's the core of the cello repertoire. You have Brahms, you have Beethoven, you have Debussy, you have all of these big names that people just tend to take for granted. And so what I want to study is how people played the cello in the 19th century, because we know it has to be different. Recordings from the early 20th century are so different from the way we play today that it simply had to be even more different back then.
What are some of those differences? How could a cello be played differently in the 18th century than it is, say, today?
Well, first off, the strings were different. We use steel strings today, or in the case of my strings, I have tungsten on my lowest string. And they used gut, sheep gut, called cat gut, but it's really sheep gut. And so the sound was a little mellower, a little gentler, a little softer. A lot of people played without end pins. That's the thing that sticks out the bottom of the cello. And the technique was slightly different. Fingering patterns were different. There was a propensity for lots of slides from one note to the next.
And how do you get at that? How do you learn how it was played? We don't have recordings. We don't have, perhaps from the early 20th century we do, but certainly not from the 19th century. So how do you gather information or insight as to how it was played?
Well, you can go from both directions. Starting from the 20th century, you can start with recordings. There are a handful of recordings as early as 1905 by cellists who may have been 50 or 60 at the time. And so they were trained in the middle of the 19th century. And so we can take that as a starting point. We can also go from the beginning of the 19th century and look at method books, look at old editions and old fingerings, and also first-hand accounts of performances.
So when you are playing some of that music, do you try to emulate how they play, or do you try to to see what it sounds like if you were to play, or have you ever played with gut strings?
I have played with gut strings. Last semester I did a project on a Beethoven sonata and strung up a friend's cello with gut strings, and that was really interesting because they react totally differently and you have to change your bow technique. What was your other question?
Well, simply, how do you get at the issue? Do you try to emulate how they played and so forth?
That's a big debate in the whole early music community, which now seems to extend into the 19th century. What's the whole point? People ask, why are we studying this? Why don't we just play it the way we like to hear it? And a lot of people talk about authenticity and historical accuracy and other things, but that's not really the point because we can never know. We don't have recordings of cellists from 1740. We don't have videotapes of the way they held the instrument. We do have pictures. That can help.
You brought your cello with us. Would you play something for us?
Well, they requested Christmas music, so
All right.
there's
Well, that'll put us in the Christmas spirit.
hopefully.
So,
Let's just make sure that I'm not going to bump into anything.
do you know anything about the history of your cello as you get ready to play it?
We know it's a German instrument from some of the little patterns on it. We know that it's 50 to 100 years old. It doesn't have a label on it, and it has lots and lots of surface damage. Like there's a spot along here where you can see it looks like someone banged it into a door 100 times. This has had to be replaced 3 or 4 times, and the varnish is coming off on the neck. So it's a little battered, but it's mine.
Now, when you travel with it by air, you have to buy an extra seat, don't you?
I have had to do that. Often people buy a special case, though. They're big white cases that you might see in airports, and you can pack it in a crate.
Okay. Well, we look forward to hearing you play.
Okay.
That was lovely. It's always amazing to me the amount of sound that you get out of a small instrument simply by the vibration of the strings. It's just really quite incredible.
It's not the vibrations of the strings.
Oh, it's not?
It's not.
Well, then tell me what it is.
So the horsehair, this is real
Okay.
horsehair. If you've ever looked at your own hair, it has little spikes on it and bits and particles. And that creates a lot of friction when I draw it across the string. And when the string vibrates, it goes through the bridge, through a small post in the middle of the instrument called the sound post. The French call it the soul of the instrument, which is kind of nice. And that connects the top belly to the bottom belly, right about there. And it makes the entire instrument vibrate, which is why everything shakes when you play loud. You can feel it through the floor.
But it is the vibration of the strings
It
that
is the
starts it
vibrations of
all.
the strings that starts it all going, yes.
All right.
But it's
very
the entire
good.
instrument that makes the sound.
Well, good luck. We
Thank you.
expect to hear great things from you.
Thank you.
And look forward to your finding out about the Fulbright and going off to the Netherlands.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
That was Alexandra Roedder, music major at UC Berkeley. Thanks for being on Bear in Mind.
Thank you.
Much has been written about the bidding wars to land star faculty and whether universities should model themselves more after businesses to better cater to their customers, or as we prefer to call them, students. Our next guest, Professor David Kirp, recently published a book on this subject. It's entitled Shakespeare, Einstein, and the Bottom Line, The Marketing of Higher Education. It's a very interesting book, David. Welcome to Bear in Mind.
Thank you for having me, Chancellor.
Tell us, what's your major thesis in this book?
Well, for the last 25 years, higher education, it seems to me, has been transformed not just by the ceaseless quest for money, but by the value of money itself. And you really alluded to that in the introduction. The language of business, the language of marketing, the language of customers, niche markets, stakeholders has emerged, and in some cases threatens to devour the old and storied views of the academic commons.
What are the forces that are doing this? Is this just simply the penetration of market values throughout all of our society, or is it something that's driving universities toward this in particular?
I think it's a little bit of both. If this was a book about the medical profession, I'd be telling much the same story. But in higher education, the demand for money is fueled in some part by big science and the great cost that that entails, in part by the rewards that come from being at the top of the pecking order. This really is a winner-take-all world. And so if you're at the top of the heap, you get the better students, the better faculty, alumni are contributing more, the contracts are bigger, and there's a more the more cycle that sets in.
But how do you know if you're at the top of the heap? What measures that?
Well, one of the other changes that's developed is the rise to power of the U.S. News and World Report surveys that seem to drive so many decisions that universities make. I don't know what the economics are of that magazine, but I'll bet that that issue and all of the spin-offs, the online materials, the books, et cetera, are the majority of the earnings of that company. And so many things that universities do are affected by those rankings.
Well, I'm told that that is by far the biggest selling issue that they have at U.S. News and World Report. And the interesting thing about it is that the rankings change, and sometimes change rather dramatically from year to year. Now, we know universities don't change that fast, but what changes is the algorithm by which they measure them. So can we put any stock in those kinds of rankings at all?
Well, what's really perilous is the ways in which universities change their own behavior to try to game the algorithms. For example, the proportion of alumni who contribute to a university is a factor that's taken into account in the rankings. And so at least one elite university decided that anyone who they hadn't heard from in the last 3 years was dead. And so was removed from the base, and so wouldn't count. Right. Selectivity, even more a more pernicious case.
Mass slaughter of alumni.
Exactly. You know, they're just unpeople, right? This is the reverse of voting in Chicago. The reverse of this process, and a more pernicious example, is selectivity matters. You know, the number of applicants to the number of acceptances. So there are elite universities that go after people who have no hope of getting admitted and say, apply, apply, apply. Because the bigger the base, the larger the number of applicants, the larger the number of rejections, the better the school looks in the rankings.
Okay. So a lot of this is really marketing strategy and positioning oneself in a very competitive environment as it pertains to students. But you also alluded to the large number of dollars necessary to conduct research at a science or engineering university today. Most of those dollars come from the federal government. And most of those come as the basis of peer-reviewed work by faculty and scientists and so forth across the country. Why do you mention research and the dollars for research as being a part of this market phenomenon then?
Well, because there are increasing numbers of dollars that come from contracts with industry, and the lower down the prestige pecking order you go, the more important those dollars turn out to be. And if you're a university lucky enough to have a blockbuster patent, you can make a fortune. Florida State had a drug patent that generated something like $150 million a year. Well, you know the numbers. That's the equivalent of the income from a $3 billion endowment. So the kinds of alliances that companies are willing to make with universities and vice versa, in which universities get money up front and companies get patent rights down the road, are where the problems, it seems to me, arise in terms of the independence of the faculty researchers and the direction of research.
But we have, as universities, we have sold ourselves to our states, as it were. We have advertised ourselves as being the engines of economic development. We're very proud of the contributions we make to the economy of the state. Is there anything wrong, therefore, with those alliances that manifest that contribution to economic development?
No, we're in a state in which the president, the recently departed president, said the motto of the University of California is, University of California means business. And I think what's wrong with that.
That is the university president. Not
The university president, not the, exactly. I think what's wrong with that is that it's an incomplete formulation. Economic development is important, but citizenship development is important, intellectual development is important, the life of the mind is important. And there really aren't people who speak to those values, and I think that's why the recent death of Clark Kerr is such it's a tragedy in many respects, but in this context, because he is was one of those great voices, speaking out for the whole array of higher education policy questions. And it's hard to find such people today.
As you think about the nature of a university today, the declining funding that we get in public universities from the states, and the University of California has dropped over the last 30 years from receiving 7% of the state general revenue to 4% today. Isn't it inevitable that if you're going to maintain the excellence of a university, you move in these directions? What choices do we have that we aren't exercising in order to maintain excellence that might not be so market-oriented?
Well, it's not just Berkeley, of course, and it's not just the University of California. This is a national phenomenon. And increasingly, as you suggest, what's happening is that great public universities are privatizing themselves. They're increasing tuition. More and more universities, and this is less true at Berkeley than in, say, Oregon or the University of Virginia, are looking to out-of-state students because they generate lots more revenue. And indeed, in those states, the out-of-state students bring in more dollars than the in-state students. Well, that's wonderful for the bottom line of the university, but terrible for that historic compact in which the state university says, we're going to do a great job educating the students of this state, in exchange for which you're going to provide funding to let us do that and let us do the kind of research and public service that we have. And I think, again, I want to return to Clark Kerr. I think what's missing in this conversation is that voice, the kind of voice that can speak over the heads of the politicians, over the heads of the bureaucrats to people and give them a sense of what's at stake in this set of issues. And I think that the productivity theme is an important one, but I think ultimately it's self-defeating, because the more you focus on productivity, the more education becomes a private good. The more you say, gee, students ought to be buying it for themselves since it's such a great investment, the more the researchers are left to their own devices, and the farther down this road you go. And you find yourself in a world which, as you know, at this university, a starting accounting professor makes more money than all but maybe the most senior member of the English department. That seems to me a dispiriting development for a university that's historically been most committed to the idea of the academic commons.
These are very, very complex issues, and the times really are changing, and I think it does bear watching what happens to public higher education. I personally am very concerned about the future of public higher education in America for many of the reasons you've mentioned, and a number of others as well. So I hope our studio audience is also, or our television audience is also, concerned about the nature of public higher education and the basis for support for it and the ultimate privatization of it. And if you want to learn more about it, you should read David Kirp's book, Shakespeare, Einstein, and the Bottom Line. David, thank you for being with us on Bear in Mind.
And thank you for having me, Chancellor.
Good. In the developed world, obesity is epidemic. In the United States alone, approximately 127 million adults are clinically overweight. 60 million are obese, and 9 million are severely obese. And the problem is affecting people earlier. Since the 1960s, the number of obese children in the United States has tripled. Our next guest, Joanne Ikeda, is a nutrition education specialist, co-director of the Center for Weight and Health, and a lecturer in the Department of Nutritional Sciences here at Berkeley. Joanne, welcome to Bear in Mind.
Thank you for having me.
You must get a lot of questions this time of year about what should I eat over the holidays and how do I keep from gaining weight over the holidays. Is this your busiest time of year as well as a nutrition specialist?
Well, it's interesting, but people have questions about these topics year-round. And certainly the holidays is how do you handle the all-you-can-eat buffet question is quite common.
We have this growing problem, and some people have said that obesity is the #1 public health problem in the United States. How do you account for it? What is contributing to it? Is it just that we're so affluent that we're eating more? What are the factors that are really leading to this widespread problem with obesity?
Well, there are two major factors. One is the increased availability of food. Food ready to eat is everywhere. Vending machines line the hallways in schools and workplaces. There are fast food restaurants every few blocks. We have tremendous increase in the number of snack foods, foods that you just put in the microwave for a few seconds and they're ready to go. So we're really constantly tempted to overeat. The other thing that we're tempted to do is a lot of sedentary activity, sitting in front of a computer, sitting in front of a television set. We don't even have to get up from a chair to change the channel anymore. We have a remote control. It's amazing the proliferation of labor-saving devices in the last century, so that it's probably possible to function quite well with rarely getting up out of a chair.
So it is a combination then of the type of food we're eating, how much of it obviously we're eating,
Yes.
and how much exercise that we're getting. Are there particular kinds of fast foods that are lethal in this way?
Well, I don't think they're lethal, but a recent study looking at consumption of food by the nation's children found that 25% of their calories were coming from foods of low nutrient density. These included foods like soft drinks, fruit drinks, chips, donuts, cookies, cakes, all of these things. And for 25% of calories to be coming from these foods, that doesn't leave a lot of calories for the nutrient-dense foods that children really need every day.
And how much exercise should a person normally get in a day?
Well, for adults, we recommend 30 minutes, and that can even be in 10-minute increments. For children, they need to go outside and play actively for 60 minutes a day.
Now, 30 minutes of exercise, what does that mean? Does that mean that if I walk 15 minutes across the campus and back again, I've gotten my 30 minutes in, or does it mean vigorous exercise? Does it have to be aerobic exercise for 30 minutes? What does 30 minutes of exercise mean for me?
Well, certainly walking across campus at a brisk rate and walking back would be considered 30 minutes of exercise. We're not as stringent as we used to be about the intensity of the exercise and whether it's aerobic or anaerobic. We found that people who do walk actively 30 minutes a day actually have a reduced risk of chronic disease. So that walk across campus and then walk back does indeed satisfy that requirement.
Most of the people, number of the people in my office, and my wife included, are on the South Beach diet these days. I've refrained from doing that partly out of personal rebellion and partly because I see the holidays coming. Is that a good diet?
Actually, the sad thing is, over the 30 years that I've been in the field of nutrition, I have seen, I can't even tell you the number of diets I have seen come and go. In reality, diets really do not work in the long term. They help people take weight off in the short term, but inevitably there is a weight regain, usually within the first year after a person goes off the diet. Sometimes people manage to keep the weight off for 2 or 3 years. But if you look at the success rate of dieting after 5 years, only 5% of people who have gone on diets have been able to maintain that weight loss.
Only 5%.
Yes, we have a very, very poor success rate in the treatment of obesity.
Wow. Well, there's another reason why I shouldn't bother to go on the diet then.
Well, the philosophy that we're adopting now is very different from the philosophy of you must lose weight to be healthy. We have a philosophy of health at every size. We found that large people, that is overweight people who are physically fit and eat well, actually reduce their chronic disease risk. And so if we can't help fat people lose weight, we can at least help them be healthy and not be at high risk of chronic disease. So even a large person should be empowered to walk 30 minutes a day, to eat 5 servings of fruits and vegetables, to view themselves as having the potential for health rather than always being concerned about what their actual weight is. Instead, focus on what's the quality of my lifestyle with respect to health. And do I have a healthy lifestyle? And if you have a healthy lifestyle and you're large, and you're not losing weight, then that's the weight you're meant to be.
This is going to make a lot of people very happy hearing this. But you're suggesting then that there is something of what is a normal weight for a person, and so long as they're having a healthy lifestyle and aren't becoming overly obese, I assume, that's okay?
Yes, we are, and that's radical new thinking, and I'm glad I'm at Berkeley where radical new thinking is in fact fostered. But the research backs it up. We have large-scale trials, the diabetes intervention trial funded by NIH involving thousands of people that showed that large people could reduce their risk of type 2 diabetes without losing weight, but by increasing exercise and improving the quality of their diet. We also have a very large-scale study called DASH, Dietary Approaches to Stop Hypertension, and in 5 weeks, people managed to lower their blood pressure just through dietary changes, reducing the amount of fat in their diet, increasing fruit and vegetable consumption, and blood pressure went down. And again, that was not based on weight loss. It was based on those behavioral changes.
Well, Joanne, thank you very much for
you're welcome.
coming on Bear in Mind.
Thank you for having me.
That was Joanne Ikeda, Nutrition Education Specialist and Co-Director of the Center for Weight and Health at the University of California, Berkeley.